The morning Cornelius Marsh died, it rained. Not a dramatic storm. Not the kind of rain that bends trees and breaks branches. Just a quiet, gray rain. The kind that settles over a town like a held breath. Like the world itself had decided to be still. He was 81 years old. And by every visible measure, he had been a wealthy man. The house on Elmfield Road had 7 bedrooms. The driveway held 2 polished cars. The garden was kept by a man who came on Thursdays. Cornelius had worn a good watch. He had traveled. He had given to the church. He had paid for his grandchildren's schooling without being asked. When word spread that he was gone, the town nodded and said what towns always say. He did well for himself. His 3 children came home within the week. Margaret, the eldest, 48, a school administrator in Edinburgh. Careful with her words and careful with her money, though she would have told you she was neither. Daniel, 44, a property developer in Toronto, always spending just ahead of what he earned, always one deal away from being truly comfortable. And Lydia, the youngest, 39, a nurse in Bristol, raising 2 children on a salary that never quite stretched to the end of the month, and had not stretched to the end of any month for the past 4 years. They sat together in the sitting room of the house on Elmfield Road and waited for the solicitor to arrive. They expected numbers, account balances, property valuations, the ordinary business of endings. The solicitor was a small man with round glasses and the practiced stillness of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. He set his briefcase on the table. He removed 1 document and 1 envelope. The envelope was old, handwritten, sealed with dark wax. "Your father," he said quietly, "left his financial estate, the house, the accounts, the investments, to the Elmfield Children's Trust. This was his clear and documented wish. It was not a recent decision. He amended his will 12 years ago." The room went cold. Daniel stood up, then sat back down. Margaret said nothing. She had the particular stillness of someone absorbing something they cannot yet process. Lydia looked at the envelope. "There is, however," the solicitor continued, "something he did leave the 3 of you." He slid the envelope across the table. On the front, in Cornelius Marsh's handwriting, unmistakably his, slanted and deliberate, were 4 words. "What I actually learned." Margaret opened it. Inside were 7 pages, each page numbered, each beginning the same way with a truth. Not rules, not instructions. Truths, the kind a man writes only when he knows he will not be there to explain them. The letter began, "My children, I spent 30 years building wealth. Before that, I spent 15 years destroying it. What follows is what I learned between those 2 seasons. I give you these words instead of money because money without understanding lasts 1 generation. Understanding lasts forever. Read each truth slowly. Read it more than once. Then, and this is the only instruction I will ever give you from beyond this room, do something about it." They read the letter together that evening. Truth 1. Never mistake the performance of wealth for wealth itself. I once knew a man who owned 3 suits that cost more than my first car. He lived in a house that impressed everyone who visited. He took his family on holiday every summer without fail. When he died, his widow discovered he owed more than he owned. The suits were bought on credit. The house was mortgaged beyond its value. The holidays had been funded by lines of credit quietly compounding for years. He had spent his entire adult life performing wealth for an audience that wasn't keeping score. The truly wealthy I have known lived simply. They drove ordinary cars. They wore ordinary clothes. They did not need you to know they had money, because they knew it themselves. Truth 2. A tree planted today feeds you tomorrow. A tree eaten today feeds no one. When I was 32 years old, I had a choice. I could use the small sum I had saved to buy a better car, or I could put it somewhere it would grow quietly for decades. I bought the car. I told myself I deserved it. The car lasted 9 years. I have since calculated what that money would have been worth, invested consistently for 40 years. The number would embarrass me to write here. Every time you spend money that could have been growing, you are eating the tree, the fruit it would have grown. The interest, the returns, the compounding over decades disappears the moment you swallow it. Truth 3. Never borrow to celebrate. Only ever borrow to create. Debt used to build something, a business, a property that earns income, a skill that raises your earning capacity is a tool. Debt used to fund a wedding, a holiday, a Christmas, a feeling of having finally arrived. That is a trap with a friendly face. I borrowed twice in my life to create. I borrowed 3 times to celebrate. The creative debt paid itself and then some. The celebratory debt followed me quietly for years, accruing interest in the background like a slow leak in a roof you keep meaning to fix next month. Now here is what most people never realize. These 3 truths, performing wealth, eating the tree, borrowing to celebrate, are not history. They are not lessons from another era. They are happening right now, on your street, in the accounts of people you know, possibly in your own home, the person with the newest phone and the highest credit card balance, the couple who renovated their kitchen on a home equity loan 6 months before they couldn't make the mortgage, the man who drives a leased luxury car to a job he cannot afford to leave. None of them planned to be there. They simply never received the letter. The financial system we live inside is designed, at nearly every turn, to separate you from these truths. Profits when you borrow to celebrate. Profits when you perform wealth. Profits when you eat the tree early. The advertising, the financing offers, the buy now, pay later options at checkout, all of it is engineered around the gap between the appearance of having money and actually having it. What Cornelius understood, and what most of us are never taught, is that wealth is not an event. It is a direction, a slow, steady movement compounding over time, built on a handful of principles so simple they feel almost too quiet to be true. The letter continued. Truth 4. Build many wells, for any single well can run dry. For 11 years, I had one source of income, one employer, one contract, one well. The year that well ran dry, a recession, a restructuring, a letter handed to me on a Friday afternoon, I understood for the first time what financial vulnerability truly feels like. I rebuilt with 3 income sources, none of them large on their own. When one slowed, the others held. I do not tell you to overwork yourself. I tell you to ask, consistently and with honesty, if this income stopped tomorrow, what would catch me? Truth 5. Keep one season's harvest before you spend what remains. There will come a time in your life, not if, but when the unexpected arrives with a bill attached. A health emergency, a job loss, a repair that cannot wait and will not wait. The people who survive these moments with their lives intact are not the ones who earn the most. They are the ones who kept something back. 3 months of living expenses, held somewhere boring and immediately accessible, is not a luxury. It is the wall between a temporary problem and a permanent crisis. Truth 6. Learn what your money does while you sleep. For most of my early life, money was something I exchanged for things. I worked, I was paid, I spent. It never occurred to me that money could be working independently, earning while I rested, growing while I was occupied elsewhere. The day I truly understood compound interest, not as a concept I had heard of, but as a force I could feel, was the day I stopped treating money as a reward and began treating it as a tool. A tool that, if directed correctly, works every hour of every day regardless of whether you do. The last page held the 7th truth. It was the shortest. Truth 7. The greatest inheritance is not money. It is understanding. If I had given you everything I built, you might have kept it for a generation. More likely, without these principles, you would have lost it within 10 years, as I nearly did before I learned them. The statistics are not kind on this point. Wealth transferred without wisdom rarely survives the 3rd generation, and often does not survive the 2nd. What I give you instead is the map. The map I wish someone had placed in my hands at 30 years old. Use it. Correct it as your own experience teaches you more. And when the time comes, pass it to your children. This is how wealth actually survives. Now, what do you do with this? Not eventually, this week. First, write down every source of income you currently have. If there is only one, ask yourself seriously, not in passing, what a second could realistically look like within 12 months. Not a dramatic reinvention. A small, realistic one. A skill you could offer. a thing you could teach, a need in your community you are already positioned to meet. Second, review the last 90 days of your spending. Not to punish yourself, to understand the pattern. Separate what you spent to create from what you spent to perform. That honest exercise done once changes something in most people. Third, if you do not have 3 months of living expenses in an accessible account right now, let that be the only financial goal that matters until it is done. Not investing, not extra debt repayment, this first. The wall first, everything else after. Fourth, choose one financial concept you do not yet understand. Compound interest, index funds, tax-advantaged accounts, anything. Spend 30 minutes this week understanding it properly. Just 30 minutes. The compound effect of financial understanding, like the compound effect of money itself, begins the moment you start. They finished reading the letter at 10:30 that night. Margaret folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. She flew back to Edinburgh the following morning and spent the next Saturday going through 12 years of her own finances with honest eyes. She found 3 things that genuinely surprised her. She changed them, quietly, without telling anyone. Daniel drove back to Toronto and told his wife the letter was sentimental but not practical. He was correct that it contained no numbers. He was wrong about what that meant. 3 years later, a property deal collapsed and the single well he had relied on for a decade ran completely dry. He found the letter again in a box during a move. He read it differently the second time. A man in genuine difficulty always reads differently. Lydia went back to Bristol and cried for 3 days. Not only from grief, though there was grief, but because she recognized herself in every mistake her father described. The borrowing to celebrate, the performance, the single well, the eaten tree. She started small. Embarrassingly small, she told her children years later. £40 a month into an account she did not touch. One skill she began teaching on evenings, for a modest hourly rate. Then 2 skills. Then a small class. She was the one of the 3 who understood earliest what the letter actually was. It was not a consolation prize. It was the map. The wealthiest person in any room is rarely the one with the most money. It is the one who understood earlier than the rest what money actually is and what it quietly requires of you. If something in this letter felt less like a story and more like a mirror, you already know what the next step is. Subscribe to the Money Parable. There is another letter waiting for you next week.